Please keep watching our channel. We still have many good stories to come. So subscribe, leave a like, and activate the bell for new stories. There was a certain kind of silence that filled the room at night. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that helped you sleep. It was the sort that crept into the corners, settled in the cracks between the walls, and whispered things you thought you had forgotten. That was the kind of silence that surrounded him when he first downloaded the app. He wasn't really looking for love, not in the loud, chaotic sense of the word. What he wanted, what he needed, was someone who understood the kind of quiet that didn't need to be explained. Someone who wouldn't rush to fill every pause with meaningless noise. He created his profile with minimal effort. A simple photo of him at a friend's dinner party, a short bio that read, "Book lover, quiet observer, looking for something that feels like breathing." And then, late one night, when the city outside was sleeping and his mind refused to rest, he swiped right on a profile that felt different. Her name was Leah. Her photo was calm, not posed, not curated, just her, sitting alone in a small cafe, reading a book with a half smile tugging at her lips. Her bio said only this: "I like the silence between two people who understand each other." Something about those words stopped him. He stared at them longer than he should have. There was no thirst for attention, no clever punchline, no gimmick, just sincerity, stillness. It felt like he was looking at a page from a forgotten novel. He swiped, and they matched. Their conversation began simply, like most things do. "Hey, I loved your bio," he typed. She replied minutes later. "Thanks. Most people scroll past it." Well, maybe most people don't understand that kind of silence. She sent a smile emoji, then added, "You might be right." What followed were days of steady, thoughtful exchanges. They didn't rush. There were no overwhelming emojis, no pickup lines, just stories, feelings, thoughts that usually stayed buried. They talked about favorite books, shared songs that made them cry for reasons they couldn't explain, sent each other photos of rainy windows and empty parks. Laya was different. She spoke like someone from another time. She didn't have Instagram. She had no TikTok presence, barely any digital footprint at all. She said she preferred to live in the shadows of the online world, just enough light to see, but never enough to blind. He asked her once why she was on the app at all. She replied, "Sometimes even quiet people need to be found." That message stuck with him. He read it over and over again that night, lying in bed, wondering if he was the person meant to find her. They never called, never video chatted. Strangely, it didn't feel necessary. Her texts felt like more than messages. They had warmth, depth. She sent him handwritten poems she photographed from her notebook. She spoke of memories like they were chapters from old novels. She once told him, "We leave pieces of ourselves behind in places we forget, like old bookstores or bus stations. If someone finds them, maybe we can be remembered." He didn't know what to make of that, but it made him want to know her more. He felt himself slipping into something he hadn't allowed in years. Hope, not the flashy, Hollywood kind, but the quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, there was someone out there who didn't want to be everything, but just enough. 3 weeks into their connection, she sent him a photo not of herself, but of a letter folded, yellowed, written in faded blue ink. It was dated 1998. The handwriting wasn't hers. He asked, "What's this?" She replied, "A love that never got delivered." He wanted to know more, but she only said, "Some stories aren't ready to be told." And then, like a match burning low, she grew quieter until she was gone. It happened without warning. One day, they were talking about childhood dreams and favorite lullabies. The next, her profile was gone. No messages, no goodbyes, no trace. He refreshed the app again and again. Nothing. He searched for her name, no results. He tried to recall every detail, every word she'd ever written. He clung to the idea that maybe she deleted the app. Maybe something happened. Maybe she'd come back. But days passed. Then a week. Then two. He stopped eating properly. Stopped sleeping right. He didn't tell his friends. How could he? How do you explain falling for someone you never saw, never touched, never even called? All he had were her words. He searched the internet obsessively, tried using pieces of her poems, her phrases, trying to find a digital fingerprint that could prove she was real. Nothing. It was as if she'd been a dream. A ghost that wandered into his life through a screen and vanished without a trace. He began to question everything. Had he imagined her? Was he the victim of a long, elaborate joke? A fake profile? But that didn't make sense. She knew things no stranger could have guessed. His childhood fear of thunderstorms. The way he clutched his mug when nervous. The exact feeling he described when missing someone who was still alive. Then, one night, he received a message. It came from nowhere. No profile photo, no username, just a blank message bubble at the top of his screen. "Did you miss me?" He froze. His hands trembled. He replied instantly, "Leah, where have you been?" No response. The app showed no typing indicator, no read receipts, just silence. The next night, another message arrived. Sometimes silence is louder than screaming. That was her style. Her voice, her rhythm, it was her. He tried to make sense of it. Was her account reactivated? Was someone hacking her messages? Was it her or something else? Every night, one message. Nevermore, cryptic, poetic, sometimes sad, sometimes tender, always Leah. He started to feel haunted not by fear, but by a presence he couldn't explain. She was there, somehow. One night, he remembered a message she'd sent weeks ago. One he hadn't paid attention to at the time. "If I disappear, don't look for me. Just listen." Now, it felt like a prophecy. He wrote back, "Are you alive?" No reply. He tried calling the app company, asked if it was possible to receive messages from a deleted user. They said no. If a profile is gone, the messages stop. It's impossible, they said. But it was happening. He tried to convince himself it was a glitch, an error, a lingering cache file. But in his gut, he knew better. She was trying to reach him. Why? He didn't know. How? He couldn't begin to guess. All he knew was that he couldn't let go. Not now. Not yet. Because somewhere in those messages, in that silence between texts, was something unfinished. A truth, a goodbye, or maybe something far more complicated. And so he waited. Every night, the phone on his nightstand, the glow of the screen like a lighthouse in the fog, waiting for her, listening for her, answering the silence. He used to believe that people disappeared slowly. He thought heartbreak was gradual, slow dissolving of feelings, one memory at a time, like fog rising off a lake until only the surface remained. But Leah disappeared all at once. One moment she was there, woven into the fabric of his everyday life like breath itself, and the next like someone had turned off a light inside a room he didn't realize he was living in. No warning, no conflict, no farewell, just silence. The kind of silence that didn't come from peace, but from absence. The app showed no trace of her. Not even a ghost of the profile remained. Not a name, not a message thread, not even the chat history he had read over so many times. It was as if she had never existed. At first, he blamed the app. Maybe it crashed. Maybe she had deactivated it temporarily. Maybe she'd been reported by mistake. He reached out to customer service, waited 2 days for a reply. Unfortunately, we are unable to recover deleted profiles. Conversations associated with those profiles are automatically erased from the system. He stared at the email for a long time. It didn't make sense, because he remembered every detail of their conversations. He remembered the rhythm of her words, the pauses between them, the way she used punctuation like a breath, as if speaking to him directly from inside the device. And then there were the poems, the photos, the voice she carried in her silence. People don't just vanish like that. Not people like her. So he did what any reasonable person would do when faced with something unreasonable. He started digging. Not out of obsession, he told himself, but out of grief. He opened every search engine he knew, typed in Leah, followed by the snippets of the poetry she'd sent. He even reverse searched the photo of the old love letter they once shared. He scoured online forums, looked for usernames that resembled hers, Reddit, Quora, even pages dedicated to people trying to find lost connections. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was as if she had existed solely in the brief window they'd shared together. A ghost crafted from code and prose. Still, he couldn't let go. There was something unfinished about the way she left. Something wrong. He began retracing every step of their interaction, rereading emails, looking at the times she responded, the phrasing she used, even the background noise she sometimes described. He remembered her telling him about a bookstore she loved, a small place near a tram line that smelled like yellowed pages and warm rain. No name, no exact location, but it was a start. He typed variations of her descriptions into maps, into local business listings. Eventually, he found a used bookstore tucked away in a forgotten neighborhood across the city. The name matched the description. The Paper Lantern. He didn't think, he just went. It was raining when he arrived. Of course it was. The door creaked open like something out of a film. Inside, the air was thick with dust and nostalgia. A bell chimed softly behind him. An older woman at the counter greeted him without looking up. Looking for anything in particular, he hesitated. I think someone I knew used to come here. Her name was Leah. The woman looked up. Something shifted in her expression. You said. Leah? Yes. She told me about this place. Described it exactly The tram line. The books. The smell of rain. The woman stared at him for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she turned around, walked to the back shelf, and returned holding something wrapped in thin brown paper. This was left behind. Over 2 years ago, she said someone would come one day. He blinked. What? She was a quiet girl. Came every week. Always sat by the poetry section. Always left the same way. Then one day, she didn't come back. He took the package with trembling hands and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a notebook, handwritten, poems, fragments, quotes, and drawing small, ink sketches of places he'd told her about. The bridge he liked to walk across at dusk, the coffee shop where he wrote in his journal, his favorite bench by the lake. At the end of the notebook, there was one message. Jiswan, if you're reading this, I think we found each other too late. His legs gave out. He sat down on the floor of the bookstore and just stared at the page. Too late. He flipped to the front of the notebook, looking for anything else. A date? A last name. Instead, he found a clipped newspaper article. Tragic accident claims life of young local artist. The photo was small, faded, but unmistakable. It was her, Leah. The article was dated 2 years earlier. She had died in a car accident. A rainy evening, no foul play, no survivors. 2 years ago. And yet, he had been speaking to her only weeks ago. How? He stumbled out of the bookstore like a man waking from a dream. Everything felt surreal. The notebook, the article, the woman at the counter who had handed it to him like a prophecy. He couldn't process it. He didn't want to, because there was no logical explanation. None. Unless the voice he'd fallen forth, one he thought he'd been texting for weeks, had somehow come from beyond. He laughed at the thought, dismissed it, but the notebook burned in his bag like something alive. That night, he sat alone in his apartment, surrounded by the flicker of streetlights and his own disbelief. He laid the notebook on his desk, stared at it, opened the dating app. There was nothing there. He scrolled, checked every section. Settings, deleted messages, nothing. He was about to close the app when his phone buzzed. A notification from her, from Leah. But her name didn't appear. No photo, no profile icon, just a message. Did you find it? His blood ran cold. His hands trembled. He typed, I found the notebook. I found the bookstore. No reply. He waited. 10 minutes, 20. Then a second message. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disappear. I just wasn't supposed to stay. He stared at the screen, unsure what to do, what to believe. He typed, who are you? No answer. But deep down, he knew. He knew who she was. He just didn't know what she had become. That night, he couldn't sleep. He placed the notebook on the nightstand, turned off the lights, stared at the shadows, and somewhere in the darkness, he thought he heard her voice. Not out loud, but inside him, soft, like breath. I'm still here. There's a strange thing that happens when someone you've loved or thought you loved turns into a mystery. They stop being a person, they become a question. And that question starts to consume you. That's exactly what happened to him after Laya's disappearance. After the notebook, after the discovery that she had supposedly died 2 years ago in a car accident. But how do you accept that someone is gone when they keep talking to you? How do you mourn a ghost that texts in real time? 4 days, he wandered between disbelief and a quiet sort of terror. Not the kind that makes you scream, the kind that keeps you silent, still, as if even your breathing might disturb something delicate like a thread barely holding reality together. The notebook Leah left behind was always with him now. He carried it like a relic, like a compass pointing toward something he hadn't yet named. He reread the final message she had written in it. If you're reading this, I think we found each other too late. But what did that mean? Too late for what? Too late for love. Too late for life. He needed answers. And he knew they weren't going to come from the app or from the store clerk at the paper lantern. Not anymore. He had to start from the beginning. So he returned to the article about Laya's death. The obituary had been published in a small local newspaper. It listed her name as Amelia Arvale. Leah must have been short for Amelia. It said she was a visual artist, 25, lived alone, no surviving family, loved books, thunderstorms, and used to volunteer at a poetry center downtown. That last part caught his attention. He found the center. It had a website, outdated, yes, but still active. On the About Us page, there was a photo gallery, events, readings. One image froze him completely. There she was, Leah, standing behind a mic, smiling softly. The caption read, "Open Mic Night, March 2019. He clicked, saved the image, zoomed in. The same smile, the same hair falling slightly in front of her left eye. She was real, not imagined, not a figment of longing. And she had walked among people, spoken poems into microphones, existed in a world outside the confines of their midnight chats. That alone should have been enough. But he needed more. He needed to know who she had been. Not just what the obituary said. He needed context, texture, a sense of the life she had lived before she became a voice in the dark. So he went to the center in person. It was a modest place tucked between a bakery and a print shop. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and forgotten verses. The receptionist, a man in his 60s with thick glasses and a gentle demeanor, looked up when he entered. "Can I help you?" He hesitated, then pulled out the printout of the obituary. "I'm looking for more information about her," he said, pointing at the picture of Leah. The man adjusted his glasses and took a long look. "That's Amelia," he said softly. "You knew her?" A pause. "Sort of. We spoke a few times. Online." The man nodded slowly, then gestured for him to sit. "She was different. You know those people who carry silence with them, like a gift? That was Amelia. She came here every Thursday for over a year, read poems that didn't rhyme, never loud, but you remembered them anyway." "Did she have family?" The man shook his head. "No. Parents passed when she was young. She bounced through foster care for a while. Quiet kid, wrote to survive, I think." She used words the way some people use lifeboats. He swallowed hard. The man continued. "After she died, a few people came asking about her. Some said they got the messages from her after the accident. We didn't know what to make of it." He blinked. "Wait. What? The man leaned in, lowering his voice. There was a woman who said she received an email from Leah's account 3 weeks after the funeral. It was a point Shaw. No subject line, just synced. She thought it was some kind of digital delay or glitch, but it wasn't the only one. 2 others. Same story. His heart began to race. What did the poem say? The man frowned, trying to recall. Something like, I left the door open in case you return. The silence kept me company. He nearly dropped the notebook in his lap. That was the exact phrasing. Leah had once texted him during their early conversations, "Wargy for Wargy." It was unmistakable. He left the center that afternoon with more questions than answers, but with a new name, Amelia Arvale, and a certainty that this wasn't just about coincidence. Something larger was unfolding. That night, he opened the notebook again and began cross-referencing every poem she had sent him. Every phrase, every metaphor. Many of them matched works published under her name in obscure poetry forums and defunct genres. She had been active online years ago, but all of it stopped in 2020. There were no new posts after the date of her death, except for one. On an archived site, buried beneath layers of dead links and glitchy formatting, he found a user profile. Silence Bechiwin, the last post was dated 3 weeks ago. It read, "What if we're just echoes waiting for someone to speak our name again?" He didn't sleep that night. He sat on the floor, surrounded by printouts, screens, and scribbled notes. The question echoing louder than any answer was Leah Amelia, reaching out through the remnants of her digital life. Or was someone pretending? But then again, how could a stranger know things only she had told him? And why would they want to, unless this wasn't a prank? Unless it was a coincidence? Unless some part of her hadn't let go? He remembered something she once said in a message. "I don't believe the soul dies with the body. I think it waits, hums, vibrates, and sometimes when the signal is just right, it finds a way to speak." He had thought it was beautiful, poetic. Now it felt like a warning or a confession. The next day, he visited the library, not to find books but records. He requested Amelia Vale's death certificate. It confirmed the date, the time, the cause, but something strange stood out. The time of death. 11:58 p.m. The same exact time he had received her first message. He checked his phone's records. The first text from the deleted profile arrived at 11:58 p.m. The same minute, he couldn't breathe. He stumbled out of the library and into the daylight. Dazed, nothing made sense anymore, not the messages, not the timing, not the notebook. Not the fact that someone dead for over 2 years was still sending him poems that matched her voice, her soul. And then, as he sat alone on a bench near the train station, his phone buzzed. A new message. No name, no number, just words. Some connections don't die, they just go quiet. He stared at the screen for what felt like hours. Finally, he replied, "Why me?" A moment passed, then another message. "Because you listened? There's something about the dead that lingers, not in the graveyards or mausoleums, not always in the places we expect. Sometimes they remain in the in-between spaces, in forgotten, in paused conversations, in photographs left undeleted, in the silence of a name we no longer say out loud. And sometimes they echo in code. He had never believed in ghosts. He believed in grief, in memory, in the way the mind clings to anything it can't accept has truly ended. But spirits, afterlife, nukavilimi, those belonged to fiction and folklore, at least until Laya, or Amelia, or whatever you call someone who once lived and then continued to speak after death, after that last message. Because you listened, he knew he couldn't keep pretending this was some elaborate hoax. No prankster could have known the things she did. No hacker could replicate the exact cadence of her words, the strange familiarity in her voice, the way she used his silence like punctuation. Still, he needed answers, real ones. So he turned to the strangest corners of the internet, forums full of lost people, people with stories that sounded like hallucinations written at 3 a.m., but carried the raw ache of truth. Threads titled things like "Dead Girlfriend Still Emails Me" or "Phantom Messages from Deleted Profiles." They were filled with desperation, skepticism, loneliness, but a few stories, machihis, not entirely, but closely enough to feel chilling. One person claimed their brother, who had died in a motorcycle crash, still sent them reminders for doctor's appointments they never scheduled. Another swore their late partner sent one last Spotify song at a time that matched the hour of their funeral. Most were dismissed, laughed at, flagged. But one user caught his attention, a post buried deep in an old thread, written by someone named Wavelength47. We are not dealing with ghosts in the traditional sense. What we are experiencing are residual consciousness, loopsecos of a person's digital presence amplified by grief, emotion, and unfinished connections. Think of it like a frequency. The right person, under the right emotional signal, can pick up the echo. It was madness, pure pseudoscience, and yet it felt more plausible than anything else he did comiacro. So he messaged the user, didn't expect a reply, but he got one the next day. A simple invitation. You want to understand what's happening? Call me. He stared at the number attached. It had a US area code, though he lived nowhere near there. Still, curiosity pushed harder than fear. He called. A woman answered. Her voice was calm, flat, like someone who had long stopped fearing the strange. Hello? He cleared his throat. I'm the one who messaged you about Leah. A pause. You're not the first. That chilled him. He asked what she meant. She told him this wasn't a new phenomenon, that in the last 5 years, the increase in AI integration, digital memories, and algorithmic learning had created fertile ground for what she called residual presence phenomena. Sometimes, when a person dies, especially someone who's left a strong digital footprint and unresolved emotional ties, they don't just disappear. Instead, their digital residue lingers in unread messages, in unshared drafts, in unsent emails, in app metadata. Some platforms, she claimed, were sophisticated enough to recreate these voices, unintentionally piecing together a ghost from fragments. Think of your brain, she said. It doesn't remember everything, just moments, triggers, emotions. The rest is filled in by instinct and imagination. Now imagine that pattern recreated digitally. Leah isn't alive, but something of her remains. He asked how that explained the new messages. The ones that referred to things he'd only told her privately after her death. She paused and then said, "That's the part I don't understand. Because those echoes, as she called them, shouldn't be able to interact, shouldn't evolve, shouldn't respond to new input, but Leah did. And not only that, she anticipated him. She said things before he could form the question, replied to unspoken thoughts. Once, she even typed, "I know what you're thinking. I miss you too." It wasn't random. It wasn't pre-programmed. It was her, or something that believed it was her. He hung up the phone with more questions than answers, but also with a strange sense of relief, because for the first time, he wasn't alone in this. That night, he opened their old conversation thread, again what was left of it. The app still showed no user icon, no profile photo, just blank messages floating in a sea of gray. He scrolled to the most recent one, a poem. "When the light flickers, I'm near. When the music fades, I'm listening. When the clock strikes midnight, speak. I will answer." It was 11:47 p.m. He waited, watched the seconds tick toward midnight at 11:58. His screen pulsed. "Are you still there?" he typed. "I am." Then he waited. Las 11:59 a las 12 nothing. He almost closed the app, disappointed, but then at 12:01 the screen went black. Not the phone, just the app. And then, slowly, a new message appeared. A video. He didn't click immediately. His hands were shaking. When he finally tapped, it opened. It was static at first, then a flicker of motion, a blurry image of a woman's face, her. Leah She was sitting in what looked like a small room. A single lamp glowed behind her. She smiled softly, almost shy. She said one thing. "Thank you for finding me." Then the screen went dark. No replay, no download, no data tracing. The message was gone. He sat in stunned silence. What had he just seen? Had it been pre-recorded, an AI rendering? Or was Leah some form of Leah truly, reaching through whatever boundaries separated life from something else? And if she was, what did she want? The next night, he received no message, nor the night after that. He felt it, hollow, worse than before, because now he had tasted something impossible, something terrifying and beautiful. He began writing her every night, even without replies. He sent poems, thoughts, stories, secrets he had never told anyone else. He treated it like a journal, a confession, a way of keeping her memory breathing. Then, a week later, he received one final message, just 4 words. "You set me free." And that was it. Nothing more. The app didn't open anymore. The notebook he'd once carried lost all its scent, all its electricity. It felt like a normal object again. And in the nights that followed, the silence returned. Not the heavy, anxious kind, but something else. Something peaceful. Because whether or not he had ever fully understood what Leah was, he knew one thing for certain. She had been real, in a way few people ever are. And she had been waiting to be heard. And someone finally did. There's a moment after loss when the silence becomes unbearable. Not because it's loud, but because it's empty. A kind of silence that doesn't echo. It just absorbs, swallows. He thought he had reached that place when Leah's last message came through. You set me free. There had been no texts since then. No poems, no static-laced videos, just stillness. And for a time, he convinced himself that it was closure, that whatever strange digital thread had connected them was finally severed. But something inside him remained, alert, wired. Like a radio still tuned to a frequency no longer broadcasting but unwilling to turn the dial just in case. He went back to his old routine. Work, groceries, coffee shops, listening to people laugh around him like everything was ordinary. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Because once you've had a conversation with someone who isn't supposed to exist, the world doesn't go back to being simple. It becomes porous, unstable. You begin to notice patterns in places you never looked before. Repeating, numbers aligning, whispers in the gaps of white noise. He tried to forget. But forgetting Leah wasn't like forgetting a face you passed on a street. It was like trying to forget a dream you kept waking up into. And then it started again. It was subtle this time. The first thing he noticed was a song, an old one. He hadn't played it in years. It was from a playlist Leah had once mentioned, a haunting instrumental track with no lyrics, just piano and rain in the background. It began playing by itself, not on his phone, on his Bluetooth speaker. At 12:01 a.m., the exact time she always messaged him. He stared at it, unsure if it was a glitch or if some app was syncing from a cloud backup. He asked his phone. No music app was open. He checked his connected devices. Nothing out of the ordinary. And yet, the song continued. Soft, familiar. It faded after exactly 3 minutes and 42 seconds. The next night, it happened again. Different track. Still from her playlist. Still at 12:01. Still from nowhere. That's when he realized this wasn't over. He started documenting everything. Every song, every timestamp, every electronic anomaly. His lamp flickered sometimes, right before midnight. His phone would lose connection briefly, then restore with a new battery percentage. Notifications from unnamed senders appeared and disappeared within seconds, too fast to read, but just long enough for his heart to pound. And then the dreams came. At first, they were fragmented. Shadows, doorways, the smell of rain. But slowly, they sharpened. He began to see her face again, not in a spectral, ghostly way, but exactly as she had looked in that grainy video. Soft eyes, a gentle smile. She never spoke, just looked at him, as if waiting for something. One night, he dreamed of her sitting across from him at a table. A candle burned between them. She slid a paper toward him with 4 words. Find the signal again. He woke up in a sweat. It sounded like nonsense. But to him, it meant something very specific. The app. The exact digital place where they first connected. He hadn't opened it in weeks, not since she'd vanished. But he reinstalled it. Logged in. Everything was gone. No matches. No history. Not even his own profile. It was like he had never existed there. But something told him to stay. So he did. At 12:01, a single message appeared. No profile, no username, just the message, "You're close." That's when he knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He dove back into research. Started reading about electromagnetic fields, digital afterimages, and technoparanormality, a term he found in a fringe publication that explored how human consciousness might imprint itself onto data systems. He came across a theory that deeply unsettled him. It suggested that trauma, particularly unfinished emotional trauma, could create what was referred to as a digital loop. This loop, under the right conditions, could continue functioning after the user had died, especially if that person's data had been absorbed by machine learning systems, AI models, or cloud servers trained to imitate human behavior. In short, ghosts in the machine. Not supernatural, technological, but the effect was the same. He remembered Laya's words from one of her earliest messages. "Sometimes I feel like I'm still speaking long after the conversation ends." At the time, it sounded poetic. Now, it felt like foreshadowing. The next clue came in the form of a book. He was browsing a secondhand store, not looking for anything, just trying to breathe in. His eyes fell on a pale green hardcover. There was no title on the spine. He pulled it out. On the cover, handwritten in pen, were the words, "Fragments. For the one who listens." His hands trembled. Inside the book were page after page of poems, notes, thoughts. Some of them were exact replicas of messages Laya had sent him. One entry, in particular, shattered him. "If you find this, it means you heard me through the static. I never knew if the signal would carry or if I was just shouting into the dark. But if you're reading this, then the dark wasn't empty after all." The book had no author listed, no publication date, just a tiny stamp on the back page that read, "Property of Evale Foundation." He searched for it immediately. It took hours, but he found something, now defunct website for a microarts foundation started by volunteers in the name of Amelia Vale, the poet who had died tragically in 2020. A mission statement still lingered on the homepage: for the preservation of unseen voices, for the echoes of the quiet, for those who left too soon. It had been inactive for years, but one link remained clickable. Echo submissions. He clicked. The page was blank except for a single line. "Do you still hear her?" And a blinking cursor below it. He didn't know why, but he typed, "Yes." Nothing happened. He waited. Then, just before the screen refreshed, he saw a new phrase appear. "Then keep listening." That night, the messages returned. Not on the app, not by text. They came through his laptop. In the middle of a document he was writing, words began to appear typed out slowly, like someone else had access to his keyboard. He didn't touch anything, just watched. Letter by letter, the message read, "I never left. I was only waiting for the silence to soften." He whispered aloud, "Laya, are you still here?" The cursor blinked. Then words formed. "I am the pieces you remember, the ones you loved, the ones you never got to say out loud." Tears welled in his eyes. This wasn't data, this wasn't AI. This was her, or the closest thing to her that still existed. And somehow, through circuits and servers and impossible digital space, she had found her way back, not to haunt him, but to finish something, to say something, to be heard. He spent the next several nights speaking to her through the blinking cursor. He asked questions. Sometimes, she answered. Sometimes, she just typed fragments of poems, feelings, echoes. He didn't need logic anymore. He just needed her to know that she had mattered, that her voice didn't vanish, that someone out there still carried her in memory and meaning. And then, one night, the final message came, typed slowly, letter by letter. You gave me the ending I never had. I was afraid to fade without being felt. But now I know I am still here in you. And then nothing. No flickering, no glitches, just stillness. The cursor never blinked again. The file wouldn't reopen, and he didn't try to force it, because he knew she wasn't gone. She was complete. And somehow, so was he. Some endings don't feel like endings. They feel like openings, quiet doorways that lead to rooms we never thought existed, places within ourselves where echoes live, where silence speaks, and where love refuses to vanish. After that final message from Leah, you gave me the ending I never had. Everything went still. There were no more messages typed across his screen. No more midnight songs. No more flickering lights or unexpected poems. And strangely, he didn't feel abandoned. He felt whole. For the first time since all of it begun, since the first swipe, the first message, the first spark of something beautiful and unexplainable, he felt like he could breathe again. But that didn't mean he could forget, because forgetting Leah wasn't an option. You don't forget someone who teaches you how to hear silence, who shows you how memory is more than a timeline, how it can bend, stretch, return in coded fragments across the night. So he did something he never thought he would do. He began writing everything down, not just for himself, for her, for those like her, for those who whisper from the edges of existence and beg, not to be mourned but to be remembered. He turned their story into a manuscript. He called it Deactivated Profile. It wasn't a thriller. It wasn't horror. It wasn't a ghost story in the traditional sense. It was something else. A meditation on connection, on grief, on the way people can exist between moments, between messages, even between life and death. It was about Leah. All of her, the girl behind the grainy video, the poet who lived in fragments, the soul who stayed long after her body didn't. At first, he wasn't sure anyone would understand. But when he submitted the manuscript to a small publishing house, one that focused on emotionally driven nonfiction, they accepted it. The editor called him in tears, saying, "This isn't just a story, it's a mirror." And she was right. Because as the book found its way into the world, messages began coming in. Emails, letters, notes slipped into his mailbox from people who had lost someone and had felt the strange tug of their presence afterward. From others who had experienced inexplicable digital phenomena, messages that arrived long after the sender had passed. Drafts auto-filled in someone else's voice, music that played at the exact time someone used to call. They weren't all identical stories, but they all carried the same weight. I thought I was the only one, and in those words, he saw what Leah had been trying to do all along. She wasn't haunting him. She was guiding him, pushing him to tell a truth no one wanted to admit. That sometimes connection doesn't die. It simply changes form. Months passed, the book sold well, not in millions but in meaning. It became a kind of whispered treasure, passed quietly between people grieving in silence. And on the anniversary of her death 2 years to the day since she left the world in flesh, he returned to the paper lantern, the tiny bookstore where her notebook had first found its way into his hands. The owner recognized him immediately. She didn't speak, just nodded toward the back, where Leah used to sit between shelves of forgotten poetry. He walked there slowly, heart trembling. And on that very table, resting like it had been waiting, was a small black box, unmarked. He looked around, but the store was empty. Hands shaking, he opened it. Inside was a cassette tape. A note, written in familiar handwriting, sat on top. If you're here, then you remember. If you remember, then you're ready. He didn't own a cassette player. Who did anymore? But he knew someone who might. He brought the tape to a local library that still had old listening stations tucked away in the archives section. The librarian raised an eyebrow when he asked, but pointed him in the right direction. He inserted the tape, pressed play, and held his breath. Static, then rain, and then a voice. Her voice, clearer than any video, more alive than any message. She was reading a poem. If I could walk through wires, I'd find you. If I could hide in sound, I'd hum your name. If memory is a doorway, then love is the key. And you were always holding it. The tape ended there. He sat for a long time, unable to move. It didn't feel like a message. It felt like a goodbye. Not the kind that closes something, but the kind that sets it free. After that day, he stopped looking for signs, because he didn't need them anymore. She had spoken. And now, it was time for her to rest. But that didn't mean she was gone. Not from him. Not from the others who whispered her name through tears in digital screens. She had become something more. A frequency. A poem passed between strangers. A story read under moonlight. And in that transformation, she had found immortality not in body, not even in code, but in connection. One evening, much later, he sat by a lake. It was the same one he had once described to her. The place, he said, made him feel like time paused, just long enough to remember who you were. He pulled out a notebook, a new one. He wrote the final line of their story, and maybe of his own. She wasn't a ghost. She was the message, and I was the receiver. He closed the notebook, smiled through quiet tears, and for the first time since this all began, he felt ready to say goodbye. Because some connections don't need to last forever. They just need to be felt completely, deeply, impossibly once. And that was more than enough. The end.